Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 159. Now, I have finally got into my boomer tech head. Let's stop that. I have finally got it into my boomer tech head that I can't really play music very easily on this particular computer, and so I'm going to cease trying to do so. So I'm going to cease trying to do so for a while. So I just have to remember to turn the sounds off on different channels. All right, so good evening, chat, and we're going to get into this now. We didn't have a stream last week. I had a heart attack, had a triple bypass operation last Thursday, I think it was. Actually, last Friday, I beg your pardon, which went very well. And so here I am, hopefully for a while still. Welcome to my guests, Mitch and Adam. How are you going this evening, gentlemen?
Yeah, very good.
Same old.
Mitch, how are you going, mate? I always ask you that, Mitch, because I just want to hear you say same old. So, yeah. All right, guys. I'm going to confess to the audience this evening that I've not been keeping up with things as much as I might have done over the last 10 days. I have noticed a few things since I've been back, which is basically since about Thursday last week. And so Michael K, 19th century fame, quick recovery. I'm by no means recovered, but I can talk. I can sit on my rear end and talk, which is all I'm doing at the moment. Anything else, not so good. I tried to go shopping a couple of days ago, and that was quite difficult. That was a bit too much, a bit too soon. But sitting on my ass and talking, I should be able to manage that well. But yeah. So, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up this evening, Adam?
No. To be honest, I mean, I've also been quite busy, but so much has been happening. I've actually sort of struggled to sort of hang on to anything specific. God, what has been happening? Obviously, we had the.
I know we had a by-election in the UK.
Yeah. The Wellingborough, is it? I mean, that was one of the districts that voted. That one in particular, like if you looked at the stats for it, the Tories got smashed, but by Labour. But Labour won without only gaining 100 votes more than what they did previously. Hang on, let me just get the stats up for it real quick.
But it was basically people didn't vote Conservative rather than extra people voting Labour.
Well, there was some strategic voting by the looks of it. I mean, it's hard to say, but it looks like I'm just getting the stats up now.
I believe like Reform got something like 10.7% of the votes. So they have a third place behind Tories. You've got 34, and then Labour got something like 45, 46, something like that.
So in Wellingborough specifically, the Tories over their last election from 2019 lost 24,800 votes. Labour gained 107 votes, so it was a pitiful victory. Reform gained almost 4,000 votes. But here's the thing.
How many
so
of
the Lib Dems
parties were running there, Alan?
I think it was just Reform. But the Lib Dems lost over 2,500 votes, and the Greens lost almost 1,000 votes. They don't really have 1,000 more to lose.
How many, Adam? And if you have that info, how many of the smaller right of centre populist parties were running in that particular seat? Do you know?
Just in this seat, only.
Reform, I mean, other than Reform, obviously.
Yeah, none others. I don't think.
Oh, so it was only Reform. Okay.
Yeah, if they did run, they got their deposit.
I've got issues with Reform. I do have issues with Reform. I do have issues with Richard Place. On the other hand, I'd vote for them rather than the Conservatives any day, or Labour. But I see why people don't always agree with that. You know, I can see how people regard Reform as another con job party, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, they actually did, considering their platform's kind of weak. Considering their platform's kind of weak, I mean, Reform still did pretty good, which does show that like people are interested in something else. You know, they're clearly like those people that have given up on the Tories and are sitting home. Those 25,000. Clearly, there's still quite a few more of them that are willing to go and put a slip in a ballot for someone.
I just wish they would have the gumption to say, look, if we get in, we'll ban immigration just for 5 years even, which is obviously not enough, but nowhere near enough. But it would be a start. If they said that, then I would certainly go, yeah, all right, vote for them, you know?
I mean, obviously, this is the thing, though. Like, Reform gained 4,000 votes basically on the immigration issue because nothing else they talk about is of really any interest to anyone. You could get those promises from any other party. If they just talked about immigration,
but they just go on about it, unless I'm. But am I right in saying, Armand, that they won't talk about legal immigration really?
I think they do a little bit, but it's so milk toast. They're talking about bringing in a 1 in 1 out net immigration policy essentially. But like all they really need to do,
that's not enough by no means.
Yeah, all they really need to do is talk about immigration and crime, and if they want to fluff it out just a little bit more, you know, maybe just a little bit of like energy self-dependency and industry, but beyond that, but they can't even do that. So it's all kind of a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah. Mitch, what's your feelings on that by-election?
Well, I mean, I just see it as vindication of what I was saying about Richard Tice, but you've got a situation where the people are crying out for something more right-wing than the Tories, but Richard Tice is just failing. You can totally just imagine, like, you know, something like along the lines of, I don't know, let's say, I mean, you had Britain First who was stood up for election. I don't know why they did so, but yeah, like, you just look at this by-election and you go, clearly, look, people weren't voting Labour to get up the Tories. It was just a matter of they were just staying at home because the turnout wasn't like 27% or 37%. That lot, which is characteristically low for by-election, but still, it just tells you how disenchanted people are, and it's just why bother voting Reform? I mean, all we're going to talk about is how anti-Semitism is our biggest crisis now.
Yeah. Ashton Duke in the chat said Tice's little trip to Ukraine was revealing. This is another thing I missed. I had no idea he'd been to Ukraine, to be honest.
Is that true?
I mean,
did he really go to Ukraine?
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
I have no idea, mate. I didn't see this, but this is what Ashton Duke in the chat is saying.
It's not even that.
I think, you know, anyone who does that is not our friend.
It's not even that like your dis-right potential upstart populist party should be taking Ukraine's side over Russia or anything like that. Why even bother? Like, why should any populist leader be like for the right be going to places like Israel or Ukraine or Russia or anywhere? You know, it's people are sick of that shit. People are sick of all this foreign stuff.
There are not enough problems at home.
Yeah.
There's more than enough problems in Britain for British political leaders not to be pissing off to Ukraine or the Middle East. More than enough. So, yeah. I just don't understand that. But there again, I'll have to say, I don't understand why Nigel Farage doesn't take leadership of Reform. He would, I'm undoubtedly sure he would win any seat he stood for now. You know, I just don't think
that was
a chance that he wouldn't get elected.
I mean, that's one of the other things I brought up before last week's stream that didn't, you know, last week's to be stream. In the Discord, that was something else that happened. Of course, we had the whole Popcorn conference where Liz Truss has seemed to have come back out of the weeds and is trying to also sell herself as a sort of populist figure. And the press are actually like going against her, like, you know, literal like former Lib Dem, like, you know, raving Labour centrist on everything who happens to be in the Tory party, and they're coming out and saying that they're trying to paint her as some sort of far right figure. This was sort of something that sort of came out about that is Nigel Farage went to that PopCon conference, and he basically, even after last year where he implied that he might join the Tories, he's now basically ruled it out and said he wouldn't. So it's like, is this guy just without a plan, sort of bouncing around from pillar to post, kind of out of ideas because everything's kind of started to move off ahead of him, or is it just that he has a plan and misdirection is part of that, and will be none the wiser, and not in any way able to act, you know, we meaning like the right more broadly, not like us, but you know, it's a difficult one. What do we even do? What are we supposed to do? Where's the leadership, you know?
Yeah, I don't understand Farage. Adam. Yeah, I don't understand Farage. I mean, I don't. I mean, I've never really worked out his thinking from the time he resigned from UKIP after the Brexit vote, and then recommended the worst possible candidate to take over for himself. So, you know, I just don't. I've never understood that. I've got to say, I don't. I just don't know what was going on with Farage there at all. It's like he doesn't want to do it, you know.
I think, to be honest, I think that's true.
You can have your disagreements with him, but there's nobody better available at the moment as well known to the public, and he's just not willing to step up to the plate, it seems. Yeah,
I mean, we know someone from a few years back who was always really big on pushing Gerard Batten. And yeah, some people used to accuse Farage of essentially being on an ego trip and destroying UKIP out of his own vanity. I think I'm not sure if that was unfair. I just think he's at heart, he's just like an 80s liberal boomer, essentially. You know,
yeah. It's just a shame. I mean, even if he was as good as Trump, you know, and I think, you know, the closest you can come with Farage is that if there's anyone who could be a British Trump, it would be Nigel Farage. But he's just not willing to step up there. He's not willing to do it, it seems.
Well, I would go where Farage goes if I knew where he was going. If he actually did turn around and say, yes, I am actually going, I'm definitely going to join the Tories and I'm definitely going to run the leadership race, I would actually rejoin the Tories just so that I have a vote when the leadership race comes up. But, you know, people have by and large abandoned the Tory party, or at least anyone who would be willing to rally around him has left. So if he was ever going to do that, he kind of needs to give people a bit of heads up. Similarly, if he's going to stay out of the Tory party,
or the other option is he steps in and takes over reform, and then people could get behind reform, but he won't do either of those things. I just don't understand what he's up to. I mean, he has no ambition to actually provide any real leadership.
Some people have made the argument that that Tice was always supposed to just be a bench warmer, but again, like there's no actual signs that that's true. You know, if he's got some great big 4D chess move ahead of him, which it doesn't seem like it, you know, people need to have some signs. People need to be able to move with him, because he's a man that has to operate as sort of, you know, he has to have the pulse of the people, and he's not even taking it at the moment. So
yeah. Someone I haven't seen in chat for a long time, Mr. Faust. Good to see you, sir. I need to do another stream with you at some stage, Mr. Faust. I have done a stream with Faust, but it was a long time ago.
Definitely leave that for a while since your surgery to have him on.
Yeah, no, it's all right. But actually, I find Faust quite amusing. I think he's got a good sense of humour. I get on okay with him, actually, even though we don't entirely agree. And I'm a good deal to the right of where I was the last time I spoke to Faust, which would have been probably getting on for 2 years ago now, something like that. And I've come away to the right since then. I have to say. Force of what's actually been going on in the world has actually forced me to the right, to be honest, or maybe everything else has gone to the left. I don't know, something like that. But yeah, he's a bit of an enigma as Farage now. But if he doesn't do something before the next British general election, I think we can pretty much write him off, to be honest. You know, he's got as long as it does until the next British general election to do something sensible.
But this is the thing: we need an alternative, and there isn't one. You know, there's just no one out there that can that has the charisma or the political savvy that Farage has. I can think of a few people that put in a really good effort and come really close, and in a few years we'll get there. But as of now, there's no one.
Yeah, no, there just isn't. I mean, you know, there are politicians in Britain. I don't mind David Curtin, for example. I agree with most of the stuff that he comes out with, but he just doesn't have the clout. You know, he's not gonna. I don't think he's got the clout to break through. You know?
How do you feel about the new Homeland Party?
I don't know that much about them, Adam. What's your feelings?
Well, I mean, they're very new. I did have a quick look into them. They have some pretty good figures in their midst. They have that guy that used to be Renew Britannia, the YouTube channel, or not a YouTube channel. He was on one of the other platforms, I believe. But he's sort of heavily tied into it. He's a good guy. There was a little viral video that went around a little while ago, like a mini viral video about him, where he was in a church. They were doing some sort of local council meetup, and he sort of stood up and gave a little talk on immigration, and they didn't take it very well. Some people have shown a little bit of, who I won't name who it is, but some people have shown a little bit of concern over the fact that there are some old figures who floated around in groups like PA, but also other groups before that, who they think are like bad news. I think some of these people are probably a little bit.
I don't know about you, Adam, but I've kind of changed my opinion a bit on PA. I do think that PA had some bad actors in it, but in general, I think most of their people were fine, to be honest. Did they have some bad actors? Yes, they did, because any organisation like that is going to get infiltrated. But you know, I've got a general don't punch right rule these days. I just do.
I lost you for a second there. What was that last bit?
I said I have a general don't punch right rule these days, but I feel that whilst PA did have some bad actors in it, because you know any organisation like that is going to get infiltrated. On the whole, I think most of the people were fine, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it wasn't so much the PA connection. I can't remember the parties they were a part of. I don't want to say National Action, because that might be wrong. I might be getting them mixed up with someone else. But PA was definitely the more recent connection. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with PA guys. I think some of that stuff was a little cringe. I think Mark Collette is well-meaning but genuinely a bit of a dickhead. I mean, there was another thing that came out recently. There was a clip. I don't want to talk about it too much because I didn't see what the wider context is, but there was some clips circulating where people were basically calling him out because he was trying to he was kind of implying that like, you know, browns aren't the problem, it's you know, it's the blues, and it's like, okay, yeah, like you kind of got this when I was at one of the Skildings event. I think Dave the distributor's kind of made this comment a few times where he was like, well, you know, he didn't talk about the Jews, but he was saying that oh, you know, like Muslims aren't really a problem, and of course that doesn't really wash with us because our experience of Muslims here in Europe is significantly worse and significantly different to what American experiences are, for reasons that we probably shouldn't get into. But
we see, I see people on the right being you know, I think what you have to watch with this, from the point of view of us on the DR, is that, you know, whilst I'm quite certain that Israel is not Britain's friend. All right, no doubt about that whatsoever. Yeah. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that, say, Hamas and whoever else you want to talk about are Britain's friends either, because they're not. You know, they're both not our friends. And I think this is kind of the thing that annoys me a bit with some people on the dissident right, is that they think that because you don't want to be pro-Israel and pro certain lobbies, somehow you should therefore be pro-Muslim, which is also not true. You know? Yeah,
like it like this was kind of why I was a bit flabbergasted at Tice going to Ukraine. You know, it's not. It does kind of like the public position generally seems to be they're either so tied into the position that they do genuinely take a side in that conflict, which is like the regime side. In which case it's kind of, you know, they're never going to be your friends anyway. In fact, they're always going to be your enemies. Those types.
Yep.
Or on the other hand, you know, it's a case that that a large section of the public just has no interest in this stuff. They don't want to hear about foreign conflicts. They don't want to hear about our responsibility to this people or those people.
Yeah, totally agree.
You know, at the end of the day,
the British armed forces are so weak they can't even defend Britain at the moment, let alone piss ball around in other parts of the world. We don't have the men or the kit or the ammunition to do so. We just don't, and we need to wake up.
I mean, the position should generally just be that, you know, we don't care about Israel or Palestine. To some extent, we don't care about Russia or Ukraine, although there's a bit more nuance there. Britain and her people become before anything else. Right?
I'm happy, Adam. I'm happy to turn around and say I am against women and children of any race, creed, or color being killed anywhere. I'm against that, okay? As every civilized man should be. Yeah, but that's as far as I go. Other than that, in terms of Israel and its assorted enemies, I'm a neutral, basically.
Yeah, Palestine is not Britain. Israel is not Britain. Ukraine isn't Britain.
Exactly. And
Russia, ultimately,
Ukraine is not a vital British interest, and there is no real reason for Britain and Russia to be enemies.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, the leftist hysterics in supporting Ukraine against Russia is the same, albeit turbocharged, to what the DR is when it supports Palestine against Israel. It's, you know, simply this like, you know, enemy of my enemy shit. And it
goes too far. It does. It goes too far. I mean, I totally agree with you. It's like I am neutral about what's going on in the Middle East. Do I support the Houthis, for example, firing at British merchant and warships? No, I don't. And if the Brits retaliate against that, fine. That's all right. If they're attacking British ships, then absolutely they should defend themselves. And I'm not pro them at all. But on the other hand, nor do I think Britain should be chasing around like a little poodle to the Americans, which is very often the case these days, sadly, and has been for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, the only foreign concern I have is, and this does kind of, I suppose, concern the Houthis, is purely that the Royal Navy goes where it pleases or where she pleases, and anyone that tries to stop that
should be allowed to. Yeah, no, absolutely. If the Houthis are firing drones and missiles at Royal Navy warships and the Houthis then get killed, well, That's good, and good on the Royal Navy. But because they're defending the right of British flagships to sail the seas, which they're allowed to do.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely not in favour of any form of British intervention in the Arab-Israeli thing at all. Totally neutral on that. And I'm certainly not in favour of British intervention on the side of the Ukrainians in the Russian-Ukraine war, because I think the Ukrainians are in the wrong in that war, more so than the Russians are.
Yeah. Although I was trying to push to my boss that because obviously we work in customs and Maersk is our competitor, and they actually have a building in the same block as us. So I was trying to convince my boss that we should actually take sides in a foreign conflict for once and side with the Houthis. Put up a big sign on the outside, death to murder. Maybe send them.
I used to years ago when I worked for the Torres pilots in the Torres Strait. Up between Australia and New Guinea, we often used to put pilots on and off Maersk container ships.
Nice. What was that in? Is that in on a vessel or?
Yeah, we'd go out on a small, powerful pilot boat, which is like a big, not big, it's probably like a 30, 40 foot power boat. And you take a pilot up there, and all the ships going through the Torres Strait, they have to have an Australian pilot on board who knows the channels, because there's loads of coral reefs and all this kind of stuff that they have to go through. And the only ships that don't require a pilot are Australian Navy ships, basically. Well, Australian Navy ships. And we used to go and put pilots on the ships, and then we'd take them off sometimes if they'd been going the other way.
Nice.
Quite an interesting job. You go up, it was like going up against a gigantic cliff at night with these enormous, great container ships, you know.
Yeah.
And it was also quite funny because sometimes, like, if it was like you get ships from, let's say, various parts of the world, and sometimes they didn't have anyone on watch. And I remember one occasion we spent like an hour and a half before we managed to get someone on the radio, and that included using a tannoy and showing up to the bridge. There was just nobody there.
Yeah, they have frighteningly small crews for how big those ships are.
Oh yeah, very much so. And they're nearly all third world crews, even on ships which are flagged for more civilized places, you know. And you know, there's so many flags of convenience these days, because this is why you don't have hundreds of British flagged merchant ships these days. You do have some still. We put pilots on and off a couple of British flagged ships once, and also one from the Isle of Man once, I remember. But by and large, they're flags of convenience. You know, there are various third world shitholes where it's cheap to register your ship, and you can get a really cheap third world crew, basically.
Yeah, it seems to have no actual link to where the ship was built or anything now. No. I mean, even very Luxembourg technically issues like ship registration, which is just so absurd.
Yeah, registered in Luxembourg. How do they ever get that? It's very strange. But yeah, the best one we did once is we put a pilot on a US warship once. And as we're going up to this US warship, there's all these pimply-faced 19-year-olds behind 50 caliber machine guns and stuff covering us as we're coming in, because at the time the so-called war on terror was going on, because you know the Australian pilot boat might possibly have been some sort of terrorist. But that was quite interesting. But Victor Kairos in the chat says lots of Japanese cruise ships with Sierra Leone registrations. Wouldn't surprise me. I don't know that there are that many Japanese cruise ships. There's lots of Chinese cruise ships. There's lots of assorted third world cruise ships, including like former Eastern European countries and stuff like that. It's not the job it used to be being a merchant seaman. Also, is the other thing, because they don't spend long in port now. So that back in the day, it was quite a good way to go and see the world, being a merchant seaman. Whereas these days, you're very lucky if you get 8 hours off your shift when you get where you're going. You often don't, because it's contained. It's all about quick turnarounds, and so you get next to no time. I follow a couple of channels on YouTube who are merchant seamen, and they don't get a lot of time in these foreign ports that they go to. So it's not the job it used to be. And it could be quite an interesting, adventurous job for a young chap,
Yeah.
Mitch, you haven't said much for a while. Any thoughts on this stuff?
I'm not really clued up on ships, to be honest. I mean, the closest I've ever had was what? No, there was that one post where it showed like a cruise ship going through the stormy North Sea, and all I said was, I'd like to sail seas of it just to see how I would handle myself. But aside from that, I can't really say I've got much. I mean, I can imagine as pretty much everyone else, I've got Royal Navy ancestors, but I can't imagine.
Very likely, and merchant navy and fishing as well, almost certainly. Yeah, most Brits have. I'd like to see more young Brits going back to sea, I got to say. But I mean, another thing, if it takes us back to what we were talking about, Farage used to make a lot of fuss before Brexit about restoring the British fishing industry. And that seems to have all gone by the board. Haven't heard much about that for a long time from Farage either, which is something I think should have been done. Because again, it's a good thing for a young bloke to go and do that, even if he doesn't make it his career. It's a good, adventurous thing for a young chap to do for a few years. It's like once you leave school and college and this kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, it's like you get towns like Grimsby, for example, which have just turned which are just complete shitholes these days. They wouldn't be so crap were it not for EU common fisheries screwing over it. Not to mention the cod wars with Iceland, but you just think something as basic as restoring the shipping, restoring the fishing industry would be easy work of 5 minutes if we had the will. It's like I think perhaps Ataman might know. You ever heard of white paper or white papers? I think they're called on Telegram.
Yeah.
They had this article called Nayib Bukele about how the elites all hate him because they see him as because he's got opposite of him in that he shows that all the crap we live under is a matter of it's just all our elites just hate us. But if we had someone like Nayib Bukele at the helm, then things would just instantaneously improve. So that's why they hate Nayib Bukele so much.
I just feel, Mitch, that if we should be encouraging our young blokes, such as yourself and Atman and what have you, we should be encouraging our young blokes to go and do manly stuff, particularly maybe as like one of the first jobs they do after they finish their education. And it seems to me that like working on a fishing boat, a trawler, something like that, is very much a traditional British and manly activity. It's something that's going to help you grow up as a bloke. It's going to test yourself against the ocean, which is a traditional British thing to do. So I'm all in favour of that sort of stuff.
I mean, yeah, but I mean the kind of double-edged sword to that though is that you're then getting like potentially promoting that a lot of our people go into something that might actually make them a pretty decent living. Some of those careers, like oil rig work as well and stuff like that can earn a pretty decent wage. Although almost all those jobs in the UK are significantly behind in salaries to like the US counterparts. But you're also kind of then taking them further away from the institutions of like genuine power, which is like in and around academia and they're the hellholes, they're the places controlled by our enemies. But it's also
I think you're right, and I do think you're right, but I think there's two things to it. One is a lot of people are just not suited to that kind of academic political sphere. A lot of people are just not suited to that. They're not. You know? I'm not, for example. But but also, particularly if you're a young bloke, and I think we are basically, this is all a young man's game we're talking about here. If you're a young dude, if you're under 25 and certainly under 30, then you can go and do something like that for 2 or 3 years, or even 5 years, and then go and do something else. You're young enough to be able to do that, and still then get yourself into the political sphere and what have you. And you would, I think, most people would be stronger for having done that. It would increase their range of experience, it would increase their toughness, and it would increase the number of other people they knew, you know, their contact with ordinary average people and this kind of thing,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, I mean, I would always
given that we can't any longer, we can't any longer, sadly, recommend the armed forces. I think that's an alternative without the propaganda stuff and the direct state involvement which the armed forces has. So that's the other reason I think it's a good idea. Is because back in the day I would have said, yeah, go join the army or the navy for 3 years, but you can't say that anymore, unfortunately, because you know there is nothing in the British state that is worth fighting for anymore. Sadly, it just isn't.
I mean, but like, you know, to Mitch's Bekele point as well, like a lot of those industries are actively hamstrung or you know, by the government. And even like with, if you remember the pipeline in America, which sort of Biden closed down as like first order of business when he came in, you know, sometimes they just write it away with the stroke of a pen. You know, you can see this with a slightly different career to what you were proposing, but the Port Talbot Steelworks in Wales, when that news first broke, there was a lot of talk where like lefties were trying to say it was due to Brexit, and people on the right were obviously saying it was due to like net zero policies. And it's like, I mean, I never really even cared about Brexit that much. In fact, I actually voted Remain at the time because I thought that, for purely racist reasons, because I thought that they would bring in non-European immigrants to replace the European ones.
You weren't wrong about that, mate.
Kind of, but at the same time, it's like all of Europe now just gets more third worlders generally. So we were all kind of in the same boat. So looking back, it was kind of like it was going to go this way regardless. But if you look at, but you know, clearly it was due to net zero rather than Brexit, because Port Talbot isn't closing. You know, this is the thing that people kept like going over. Like Port Talbot's not closing, but it's having to change its forges to a recycle forge because
zero.
Yes, because Port Talbot as a raw steelworks, I forget how much it was. It actually produced an enormous amount of Britain's entire CO2 footprint by itself.
But the ridiculous thing, Adam, is that, you know, one of the reasons Britain still needs steel is one of the industries Britain still has is shipbuilding, and particularly naval shipbuilding. We still build our own warships, just about. And you can't build your own warships without steel. You need steel for warships, you know. It's and if you really want to make Britain into an absolute fifth-class power in the world, then don't produce steel. Don't produce your own warships. Buy them off other people.
Funny how in the post-war years, America suddenly needed to facilitate and build up this new ally in Asia, namely South Korea, and instantly British shipbuilding died and South Korea became the world's biggest shipbuilders. Funny how that happened.
Instantly is a bit of an oversimplification. And British shipbuilding the British shipbuilding story is complicated. And I'd like to do a stream on it at some stage. But you know, it takes you back to the Washington Naval Treaty in the 1920s and all sorts of stuff if you're going to go into it properly. And if you come right up to date, Britain had 4 fast fleet tankers built in Korea. And I am in support of those because they were far cheaper than they would have been if we'd built them in Britain. And we didn't have the facilities to build them quickly enough. And they were Royal Fleet auxiliaries. They're not warships. Okay, they're fast tankers. That sort of stuff, I'm afraid, I think we just have to put up with, unless people are going to invest in shipyards that can build them quickly. On the other hand, our warships, we do need to build ourselves, and we have so few facilities to do them now that, this is why we're in the ridiculous situation where in 2024 there are 16 Royal Navy destroyers and frigates, which is ridiculous. 16. That's the entire might of the Royal Navy. It's just craziness.
Yeah, it's more
and unless we invest in that, well, we're never going to get that number up much unless we invest in facilities that allow you to build those ships more quickly.
But yeah, I remember. Sorry, go on.
No, you carry on, mate.
Well, I was just going to say, I remember I like quite a few years ago now, before lockdown, I remember actually doing a little deep dive and trying to get to the bottom of how exactly British shipbuilding died out. And I remember reading these articles where there were interviews from back in the day with people that were lobbying the government to keep shipbuilding alive in Britain. And they were talking about how they would talk about how there was all this money being pumped into investing in rebuilding German shipyards, but British shipyards were just sort of forced to tug along with sort of really outdated old tech. And this was essentially blamed on British workers just being too lazy or other such things. Which has always been the case.
Obviously nonsense. Every time you hear this, it's always crap.
It's always just
the thing is
for them.
But British workers used to be able to build ships more quickly and more efficiently, better and cheaper than anyone else. And they were being quite well paid when they were doing so. And that was basically destroyed over the 20th century. It was just gradually destroyed over the 20th century.
Yeah.
And as I say, these days you're in a position where we have one place that can build nuclear submarines. We have one or perhaps two places that can build frigates. We have one place that can build big ships like aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, this kind of stuff. And it's just, if you're going to be in that position where you only have one dockyard that can do that, then obviously it's not going to be efficient. It's not going to be good value for money because there's just no competition. And what have you, I mean, there's no particular reason why the Koreans should be able to build ships more cheaply and quicker than the Brits can. The South Korean wages are not lower than British wages.
No.
They're not. In fact, Britain has very low wages these days, partly because of the mass immigration that the major British parties all encourage and support.
I would say that South Korea is a little poorer than some people realize. I mean, one of the things that people are always quite shocked when I show them is that there are literal slums in some parts of South Korea. But yeah, you're right. The wages aren't as low, and British wages even back in the 50s and 60s were pretty shockingly low. And John Best says China has 10 times the shipbuilding.
British wages were at their best prior to World War I. British wages were at their best in terms of proportion to other people in the world prior to World War I. This is what people don't realise. Ever since then, British wages have been getting worse, not better.
Yeah. I mean, John Best said China has 10 times the shipbuilding of Korea. That is true, but for a long time, Korea was sort of between the sort of fall of us as a global shipbuilding magnate and the rise of China. There was a period where Korea was the biggest, and Korea's industry was largely.
I'll give you another example, Adam, and another example, and perhaps a better one from Britain's point of view, is Japan. Japan has a considerable navy. It's actually, in terms of overall numbers of ships, it's quite a lot bigger than the Royal Navy these days. And Japan has high wages. Japan does not have third world immigration, although there is constantly pushes to get them to take it. And yet Japan manages to build ships very efficiently at good prices. and they have all the same things against them that Britain does, except they didn't shut all the shipyards down, as the Brits have. Japan also produces quite a lot of steel still, which Britain doesn't produce a lot of anymore, as started this conversation. So I don't know. I mean, I often think Britain should look at Japan and say, look, we could do things a bit more like they do, you know?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, we're talking about the same government that, I mean, I've covered this numerous times before, although it does need covering more in depthly by someone at some point. You know, how the government sort of through the 60s, like deliberately crushed industry in the Midwest, you know, in the West Midlands, I should say. But, you know, and you can see there's not quite as strong a paper trail, but you can absolutely see the same things happening with shipbuilding sort of from the 50s onwards.
Yep. I mean, I think your verbal slip there, Alan, was quite quite apt. You know, when you said the Midwest, because you know the American Rust Belt and the British Midlands were very similar. You know, they were our industrial areas, for God's sake. They were deliberately destroyed.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that like Curtis Yarvin, everyone slags him off now, but Curtis Yarvin has this essay on like the source of anti-Americanism. And he says that like the anti-Americanism comes from America itself. And the funny thing is even though America has sort of exported this anti-Americanism that targets like middle America or the you know, the Midwest, essentially, you can actually go to places that have been in a state of decline here in Britain, and you will see these people who are like, you know, bottom of the barrel, like lower class Brits, and they'll be walking around with Oakland Raiders jackets on and you know, baseball caps for baseball or American football teams that you know, and they will partake in the same interests. And you know, you'll even see, you can go to these places and they'll have, some of them will even have like these big American pickup trucks that they've gotten imported or something. You know, it's kind of weird how
look, I mean, this is I'm an old bastard, and I've seen this all through my life. Is that, you know, Britain over my entire life, I was born in 1965, and over my entire life, I've seen Britain become more and more Americanized over that time. It was less Americanized in the 70s than it is now by 1,000%. You know, there was a lot more actual British culture around then. Where I think it's unfair is if we blame that on the Americans. I mean, is that the Americans' fault, or is that our own elite's fault? You know,
have our own elites kind of one and the other.
Defend British culture? No, they haven't.
Like to a large, like, I mean, here's another funny thing as well. You will encounter lots of British shitlips, like modern leftists here in Britain, which I think British leftists are the worst leftists you can find anywhere in the world, of any Western nation. And when you come across these people, they will bleat and scream and yap about Americanisms, and they will try to accuse you at every turn of Americanisms. But all of their values are exported Americanisms, like intrinsically so. You know, so I hate these people so much. That's really my only point.
Same, mate. Look, we were talking before the stream that, like, because I had my heart attack, I'm not going to get myself worked up this week. But yeah, absolutely. I detest these people so much. You know, and the ones who are constantly saying, "Oh, this was Britain's fault, and we should feel guilty for colonialism," and go get stuffed. Really, I've no room for that. Like the thumbnail for this stream, the thumbnail for this stream this week is Royal Marine Light Infantry dudes who fought in the defense of the British legation in Peking in 1900 during the siege against the Boxers and the Chinese army. And I was watching Morgoth and Endeavour's review of the movie 55 Days in Peking with Charlton Heston. Pretty good film. And David Niven. I totally agree with what Endeavour was saying, was that, you know, I'm happy that these Western European type people were able to blow thousands of chinks, so I don't care, Good luck.
Yeah.
Really, no sympathy for them, none whatsoever.
Victor Caleros in chat said Spanish leftists are worse, I think. I could imagine that Spanish leftists are absolutely rabid.
I watched a video earlier. Sorry, beg your pardon, Mitch. You carry on, mate.
Other feminism in Spain is horrendous. So there's got this gender violence law, which just is pretty much open season on any man. If a woman says at any time she was abused, and I believe our standards of evidence are bloody lax or something. I can't remember what, but it's very dystopian law, this gender violence law, and that's how bad feminism is in Spain.
I was watching a video only half an hour before this stream, Mitch, and it was of a parade in Spain of little girls, like, I don't know, 8, 9, all done up in stockings and suspenders and stuff like this, doing a parade with big LGBT flags on their backs. And, like total child abuse, basically, as far as I'm concerned. Really sick.
Yeah.
And that was in Spain. Spain's in a very bad position these days.
Yeah, it's quite funny because I know Spain's also got the lowest birth rate in Western Europe, probably like 1.23, I think it's something. It's like the lowest in Western Europe, and it's just, I mean, the country has really fallen so hard since 1975 when Franco popped his clogs, and Juan Carlos turned out to be a terrible king for his own people.
I'm looking forward to Apostolic Majesty's stream that he's got coming up shortly, which is going to be about Franco and his effects on Spain, because I think he's going to look at that and look at all right, he did save Spain for a while, but then latterly he didn't do them any good at all. They're now in a worse position than many other countries.
Well, I mean, he was grooming a guy called Luis Carrero Blancos, I think his name was, or something like that, but he got killed off by the Basque ETA terrorist organization. It was kind of like the IRA, but for Spain.
I remember them.
Yeah, that kind of disheartened Franco by the looks of it, and so he just gave in. Because, I mean, he didn't want to name Juan Carlos as king because he was too liberal. And the only alternatives were, well, Luis Carrero Blancos, who's now dead, or you got the Carlists. But the Carlists are too much of a fringe group by that point. Like, they didn't have the strength they had, say, in the Civil War or back in the 1830s or whatever when they started. So,
yeah, no, that makes sense. Absolutely, it does make sense. Mitch, since you're here, and since the Ruskies are just having, I would say, probably their biggest victory so far in Ukraine at Adviika. What's your take on this stuff? Since you speak Russian and you follow this stuff a lot more than I do, so would you like to give us a fairly short rundown on what's going on there?
Well, the thing about Avdiivka is it was the most well fortified Ukrainian fortifications you had in this war. It was very heavily fortified. It was used as an artillery staging point for bombarding the city of Donetsk for bloody ages since the start of all this back in 2014. The city, even just like a month or 2 months ago, surrounded on 3 sides with only like a western road, which as of like a couple of weeks ago pretty much got cut off. So you can well imagine the situation of despair in the Ukrainian camp when, for example, you have Alexander Syrskyi, who replaces Zaluzhny. Because the thing about Zaluzhny was he was a lot more pragmatic. Like he wasn't willing to just go Festung strategy, defend his towns, even against all military wisdom. Whereas Syrskyi is a complete yes man. He will just do whatever Zelensky tells him. So that's.
I tell you what, Mitch. And I don't know if you agree with this, but one of the things that the Ukrainian strategy of just defending all these little, these small cities and towns and villages to the very last, it just a bit reminds me of the Germans in 1945. When Adolf would turn around and say, "Oh no, this place is a fortress. and has to be defended to the last man. And of course, they get surrounded, and eventually they get captured because you can't hold out forever if you don't withdraw your line a bit.
Well, it's all about. I mean, with like Bakhmut and earlier cases, I mean, I suppose my viewpoint was fully cut off, but with Bakhmut, you didn't see a complete race like we're seeing right now, where the Russians they've got a lot of momentum, and there are villages to the west of Avdiivka, which are getting where the Russians are already attacking those positions, like these little defensive lines, which kind of act like reserve defense lines, I suppose. So that's how bad the positions. I mean, we even abandoned the coke factory, which was the most heavily fortified sector of Avdiivka itself. So you can imagine how bad the rout was, that they're abandoning some of their best positions within the city because it's just. I mean, Ukrainian morale was already dropping because I think it was something like there were 10 FABs dropped. I don't know if it was per hour or per day. These are glide bombs that are guided to bomb a certain position. So you can imagine the just absolute despair that the Ukrainians would feel. It'd be like, I don't know, let's say you're a Gondorian soldier at Minas Tirith, while you got the Nazdol coming in and like taking you off your feet and dropping you. That'd be like the kind of feeling that you'd have as a Ukrainian in that city.
These are like these FOB things are like they're an adapter kit that you can put onto a standard iron bomb, which has got like it enables the bomb to be guided, and so turns them into a Russian equivalent of a paveway or something like that.
Yeah, because I mean these are like these bombs are like from the 80s.
It's not difficult for the Russians to do this now. Yeah,
because the thing
they can use old bombs, put these kits on them, and then they are accurate guided weapons.
Yeah, so you just got this situation where the Russian urban warfare tactics have just been a lot more refined over the past 2 years now, to a point where, because Avdiivka, no one was expecting Avdiivka to fall so suddenly. Because I mean, even just like a week ago, everyone was saying, "Oh, well, Ukraine has to pull out," and then in the space of a week, it just went from a slow grind into a very violent, bloody struggle, akin to what happened to Solidar over a year ago, where the city fell very violently in its final stages, as opposed to Bakhmut, which was a lot more of a slow grind. Because I mean, of course, Avdiivka was a slow grind.
I think
the
Ukrainians are they're definitely going to end up with a lot of captured soldiers in this latest battle, because there's been a lot of guys who have been cut off.
Yeah, you've got the 3rd Assault Brigade, which is, I believe it's Azov, but some people argue not. I don't know. I'm not really too familiar with the details of them. They were deployed to cover the escape of all these Ukrainians. They just got absolutely smashed within not even the space of a week. Like, there was this place at Selidova, which is like a village west of Avdiivka. 1,500 Ukrainians assembled into one place. It got hit hard by an Iskander missile because someone must have ratted out the position of all these gathering Ukrainian reinforcements. American hundreds are dead as a result of that one Iskander strike. Because you got these Iskanders, they've been a lot more upgraded than what they were when Surovikin was doing.
Yeah, they're very powerful missiles. Yeah.
So you can imagine
all the Ukrainians can put against that is they sank an ancient Ruski tank landing ship from the 1970s. I mean, big deal. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to lose the warship, but it wasn't an important warship.
I was going to ask about this actually because I noticed that the press here, like I even had a friend of mine actually ask me. He was like, "Is the war in Ukraine actually still going on?" Because the press was so silent about it for so long. But then now they've piped back up and they just keep talking about the Battle of the Black Sea and this enormous victory that the Ukrainians have had, which is going to lead to far-reaching consequences down the road, even though they all kind of admitted that other offensives haven't gone very well. So what is actually the story in the Black Sea?
Do you remember in the Falklands War, Adam, and I'm sure you don't remember because you're not old enough, but one of the infamous things in the Falklands War was a UK Royal Fleet auxiliary called Sir Galahad being hit with the Welsh Guards on it, and quite a lot of guys got killed because they got trapped on the ship when it was hit by bombs. and they got
Yeah.
burnt and stuff like this. Yeah.
Was this was this the one which, oh, I forget his name. There's a particularly
The
famous
Welsh
guy.
guardsman Simon.
Yeah,
Simon
that one,
Weston.
Simon. Yeah, yeah, something like that.
And
Yeah.
he got terribly burnt, and then he married
Mm.
the nurse who looked after him. I remember that. Yeah.
Mm.
Very brave man.
I've got a book on that somewhere
Welsh
called like 4 Weeks in
Yeah.
May or something, which was actually quite a good read.
Well, he was on that ship, Sir Galahad, I think it was called.
Mm.
And the ship that the Ukrainians have destroyed in the Black Sea recently is pretty much exactly that sort of ship. It's it's only like 5,000 tons or whatever it was, a very poorly armed ship, which is basically just designed to land people, and not really in the face of the enemy. Okay, so it's not an important ship. Was Simon Weston? Thank you, Davey, 1602. But yeah, so this is the sort of ship that the Ukrainians. It's not a major warship. It's not the equivalent of, say, sinking something like HMS Albion or HMS Bulwark, which is about 5 times the size of one of those, and much more.
Yeah.
It's not a big capital ship. It's a small little landing ship, which has always been very vulnerable, and was really only designed to land men and vehicles after somewhere had been captured.
Right, and is this the only serious action in?
And it's a propaganda. It's a propaganda thing, mate. The only victories the Ukrainians win these days are propaganda, basically. It's of no effect on the actual Russian war effort. No effect at all, really. Meaningless. And like I say, it's a poorly armed ship. It's probably got a couple of 20mm cannons and a couple of machine guns on it.
Yeah.
It's not a real warship, and that's the best they can do. And the Western media the mainstream media makes a big fuss about that, because that's the only sort of victories Ukraine can win now. It's propaganda bullshit, basically. But it's not like sinking a major warship. It's not. It was literally a 1970s built Soviet era warship. So it's like, it's nearly as old as I am. So it's a very old ship.
Yeah.
So that's my view on that. But then, the thing I suppose we better talk about briefly, because we didn't do it because we weren't able to do a stream last week, or I wasn't, is the Putin interview with Tucker Carlson. Any takes on that, gents?
I did a stream with AI last week, a bit about where I just detailed on my views. I just saw it as on what the main irritating thing was when people went, "Oh, well, Putin can talk about history for 30 minutes," and I go, "That's not really special," because every one of us here and in chat can do the same. Look, we all understand our elites are malicious retards. I don't need to be reminded of that every day. So, that was the main irritating thing about the interview. Not the interview itself, but just a lot of people's reactions to it, in terms of just, Putin's like very Ubermensch because he can talk about history for 30 minutes. And not really special. It's more. But then you also have Putin. He made a lot of talk about how Nazism. He used a lot of buzzwords in the sense that on one hand it's the Russian understanding of Nazism is different from ours. Like we think of Schindler's List and all that, whereas in Russia they think of battles at Stalingrad and Leningrad where their people suffered. And they don't talk about that certain minority. They talk about the Russians or the Ukrainians or the Belarusians who suffered from the German invasion.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of people got really caught out by his use of that phrase, and yeah, like you've even seen the press over here crying about his use of it, being like, "Oh, he's trying to claim this, that, and the other." It's like, no, it's just the culture is different in such a way that the words mean different things, but even if they have the same general source, the outcome of World War II for them was just so substantially different to us. for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, they lost a lot more people, and yet they won. Well, as a nation, they won more than we did, but they lost a lot more people than we did. So,
yeah.
I mean, but then when you say as a nation they won, I mean, well, Stalin and his regime won, I guess, is what you would say. On the other hand, I totally see why the Russians still honor the dead from the Great Patriotic War, and it's like it's more. I think it's more to do with people supporting Mother Russia than it has anything much to do with the actual Soviets. They look on those dead as people who died for Russia, which is probably what we would do if we were in the same position as Brits, or Australians or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I know that they've like Putin himself has put up, putting money towards putting up monuments to various battles and other such things that went on, and it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting to see how it's kind of been reframed in that under the Soviet Union it would all be done through like party language and party lines, and now it's kind of done through sort of more nationalist lines. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, but I do think that most of the Russian reverence for the Great Patriotic War, which is what they call it, is much more akin to the kind of stuff that Britain has for the war dead from World War I and World War II. It's not really political. It's more they're our ancestors and they died fighting for us. I think sometimes in Britain it becomes they've made it politically unhealthy because Britain seems to well, until recently Britain just viewed itself in terms of the Second World War, which is ridiculous because it was by no means Britain's finest hour in any way, shape or form.
Duke, those soldiers went over the top at Passchendaele for the good of diversity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they landed on D-Day for diversity and save various religious minorities. Yeah, they weren't doing it as patriotic Englishmen, who were actually trying to defend their families. No, of course not.
Right.
But
if anything,
that's always been my view on this. Is I will never denigrate the fighting men from World War II or World War One. Never denigrated them. Some of them were the bravest of the brave and very good men, but they were nationalists. They were right wing by today's standards almost entirely. And they weren't doing it for the reasons which are now assigned to them by our political elites and our mainstream media.
Yeah.
People did not fight in World War II on the basis of, we want to liberate concentration camps or we want to do this. No, they didn't do it for that reason, not at all. They might have done it like my granddad did because his house was bombed in London in 1940. They weren't doing it for people on the continent.
Well, it's quite funny how before the 1970s, with that Meryl Streep TV series, I think literally called Holocaust, I believe it was, you don't really see many war films done by either us or the Americans that talk about that certain minority in that time. It's just always, like, for example, you have The Longest Day. That's like the most emblematic World War II film for me personally, where it's just, just shows the German soldiers are just simply, they're fighting for their country. They're not terrible people.
Yeah.
It's just their fought on one. They're just seen as fighting alongside.
It's like in modern films, Mitch will often talk about, we're going to go and do this, that, and the other to the Nazis. Now, of course, Churchill, because Churchill was Churchill, and not a man I am a fan of at all. He used to go on about the Nazis and all the rest of it. But generally speaking, like if you listened to contemporary British soldiers and sailors and airmen, they didn't talk about the Germans being the Nazis. They used to talk about the Germans being the Jerrys. They were just the Germans. that doesn't mean they always liked them, but there wasn't this, they're evil Nazis. No, that wasn't the case. It just wasn't.
Yeah, it was seen much more as a sort of another large geopolitical conflict rather than this ideological one that it's been turned into for the post-war consensus.
Yeah.
And of course, like, I mean, this is like you
there
were
was
saying.
not this huge hatred between the frontline soldiers. Mostly, there wasn't.
No.
Very little evidence for it. I mean, yeah, all right. Occasionally, you got arseholes in the SS who did nasty things. All right, you did sometimes get that. And in those cases, yes, there was hatred. But in general terms, like the average British soldier and the average German soldier in 1944 in Europe, they didn't particularly hate one another and generally treated each other's wounded and captured guys quite well. They did.
Well, it's like, I mean, the closest things you've got towards German bitterness at us in World War II was the Commander Order, which I don't even know how valid that would be in terms of, because I mean, I understand like espionage, can be somewhat tricky subject for Geneva Convention, but still, I don't know. Other than that, I mean, there's a German nationalist I know of, and he says like, oh yeah, like the Germans, in terms of how they look at World War II, they probably see us as the most chivalrous opponents they've ever had, because he pretty much echoes what Ernst Jünger would say of us, in the sense that we're very chivalrous, very brave. The Germans have a higher opinion of us than they do the Americans or the Russians or the French. I mean, they have a high opinion of the Soviets, but it's more like a sense of tenacity rather than tactical prowess, like we exhibited in 1918, for example.
I'd give you an example, Mitch. I was watching a video, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and it was about HMS Duke of York, which was a Royal Navy battleship, and also HMS Belfast, the cruiser, which is still preserved on the River Thames in London. They sank the Scharnhorst, the German battleship. And when the ship was sunk, and there were only, I think there were only about 35 German survivors because it was in the Arctic Ocean. And it was rough seas and very, very cold. And they got about 35 Germans out of the water, and that was it. The rest of the German crew, which was like 1,000+ men, all died. And the captain of the HMS Duke of York, the admiral in charge of the Royal Navy Task Force that sunk Scharnhorst, turned around and said, I hope, gentlemen, that if we are ever in a position where we are in hopeless fight, that we fight our ships as bravely as the Germans fought their ship. And that was much more what really went on. And also no sailor likes to see other sailors drowning, even though they want to win the fight. No one wants to see other sailors drowning,
Well, it's similar to how it's similar to how leftists look at the American Civil War today. It's like they're more bitter about it, whereas the average Union and Confederate soldier in most days had no bitterness towards one another. They just saw themselves as just brothers fighting a war which should never have happened. Whereas the average shitlip looks at the American Civil War and looks at it with a sense of bloodlust that I don't even get where it comes from, other than just like ideological hatred of the Southerners who've always exhibited more. I don't know. I don't think it's too cliche to say masculine in terms of, because I mean they do register for the army more than the other parts of the United States, but we just see the South as just an ideological animus of everything they despise in America, like the patriotic, not militaristic, but like I don't know what the word is.
I just feel that in the 1860s, after the American Civil War, the American Civil War ended in 1865, and I just feel that in the 1860s and the 1870s and 80s and 90s, very few real Americans regarded Robert E. Lee as anything but an honorable man and a good general. I don't think any of them really did, This idea that somehow he was representative of an evil system is completely modern and doesn't come from real Americans. It comes from minorities in America, shall we say.
Well, I mean, you also get this spiteful shit libs. You're getting like places like New York and California who are just like the animus of what Robert E. Lee fought against, in the sense that, you know, because you have, I don't really know too much about the American Civil War in terms of the causes. I mean, about the actual war being fought, but you've got the federal government just pitting themselves against the Southerners who weren't. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but like, you get the whole sense of
95% of Southerners, Mitch, 95%, and actually I think it was considerably higher than that, didn't own a single slave. They couldn't afford one. You know? So,
yeah, but I think that I was also trying to get across was like the Southerners weren't fighting to keep slaves. It was more a matter of, well, on one hand, like they did fear what would happen if the slaves were free, because I mean, you have that Nat Turner revolt, I believe it was called, back in like 1831, where a bunch of slaves who rebelled and killed off a lot of white people, including women and children, before being put down. And we also feared what happened in Haiti, where, you know, if the federal government were to turn the slaves loose.
Oh, where they butchered every white woman and child. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so that's probably what the Southerners were more thinking of. They weren't thinking of like preserving slavery. Most of them weren't, but because a lot of them were just yeoman farmers who were just tilling the land.
Yep.
Regular people.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Any thoughts on that,
Armin? Yeah, I mean, like the boomer cons always get a lot of stick for saying that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but it really wasn't really about slavery. Like,
no, it was
states'
rights. States' rights were a large part of it.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, but it was also like, I mean, you could say it was about blacks more broadly than it was about slavery, but you know, there was a like the North was trying to essentially industrialize out of wealth that it was stripping out of the South, and it was, you know, telling the South who they could and couldn't do business with, and stuff like that. To which we were a big trader with them. Which was why, I mean, that was another reason why the slavery was really,
which went to the Midlands.
Yeah, I mean, that was another reason why the slavery,
especially, of course, which went to the Midlands in Britain, to the big cotton mills and stuff like that.
Yeah, but that was the reason why. That was the reason why, one of the reasons why slavery was more bigged up as an issue, was because it was used to try and keep us out of, you know, siding with the Confederacy at the time.
Yep.
And as well, various other European powers as well.
Could I just agree with AI Shiatori, who's talking about the Hornblower TV series in the chat, and he's saying the best episode has to be the Frogs and the Lobsters. I totally agree with that, AI Shiatori. It's an excellent episode. Sorry,
I keep meaning to watch that show. I've never actually seen it.
It's pretty good, mate. It is. If you like Master and Commander, the movie, Hornblower is the closest you're going to get to that. Obviously, a little bit smaller production values and so on, but not bad. And the Frogs and the Lobsters is a great episode where the Royal Navy has to land this French royalist force, and also one battalion of British infantry to help them out, and it becomes quite desperate in the end. But it's a very good episode.
Yeah, but yeah, to like bring it slightly back to like, because we started off by talking about like British attitudes towards World War II, and like how this has been formed into another thing is to like see how this has been formed into like the post-war consensus and like the modern founding myth, you know. And Mitch, you said earlier about like people saying, oh, you know, isn't it amazing that Putin can like recite 1,000 years of Russian history, and you're saying, well, it's not that impressive. But of course, like if you sat down like Keir Starmer, like one of the few like white politicians with a chance at number 10, you know, you would actually get something probably about Windrush, right? And it's like, for years I've wanted to see the end.
I bet he couldn't do 1,000 years of British history. he could not go back to Alfred the Great. No way.
I bet you can't. I bet you can't do anything before 1945 at the earliest.
Yeah, and it's like you know, and it's not only is the sort of the construction of the post-war consensus and this founding myth of fighting fascism, like it's totally toxic and destructive. It's you know, a founding myth should have vitality to them, and this is instead destructive and disgusting and promoting of self-hatred. And for years I've wanted to see that end, and it looks like it's been ended, but by the mainstream, and to be replaced by 50 odd Jamaican families getting off a ship in 1948. It's we've gone
that's
from
so true, man.
we've gone
that's so
from the
true.
Church of the Holocaust to full on negrophilia by the British state.
Yeah. Did you see that London Overground? That was lines like suffragette line.
Yeah.
What is it? Lioness line, Windrush line. I mean, the only good use of Windrush line is actually if Steve Law's got into power and started the good old Windrush line, but the other way around.
Yeah, it goes straight to Dover.
But listen, the thing about the suffragettes, for example, I mean, the suffragettes were terrorists. They planted bombs. They literally planted bombs and stuff. And to make them even worse, during World War One, they came to an agreement with the establishment, and it was these middle class, and they were middle class for the overwhelming middle and upper class women, who would go around giving white feathers, which signified cowardice, to any British boy, and sometimes they gave them to like 14 and 15-year-olds, any British boy or man who was not in uniform. And they often gave them to guys who were in civilian dress because they were on leave. They were either on leave for their unit because they had leave coming, or very often in World War One, they were guys who were on leave because they'd been wounded.
Yeah.
When I was a young bloke, I met a bloke who was given a white feather on a British on a tram in London, and the reason he was in civilian dress is he was about to be sent back to his unit. He'd been wounded on the Somme in 1916, and he was quite badly wounded, and he was in England for like 8-9 months. And he was about to be sent back to his unit because he was well again. And his wife, he was a young dude and he had a kid, and his wife was petrified he was going to get killed because, the huge casualty lists were a big deal by this time. And because his wife was so petrified he was going to be killed, he said, right, well, when I'm going to go home and see my wife before I get on the ship to go back to France, I'm going to wear civilian clothes. Because if I wear my uniform, it's just going to scare her more. Yeah. And because he was wearing his civilian clothes, some twat of a suffragette gave him a white feather. He spat in her face. And I don't blame him in the least degree.
Yeah.
This was a bloke wounded in the Battle of the Somme, going back to his unit, and she gives him a white feather, and she's never going to go anywhere near the front line,
My great grandfather, who fought in the First World War, he was deafened and was thus struck off. He was sent home because he was completely deaf in both ears, and through being wounded, and he was given a white feather by a suffragette for not going off to fight.
They were scum,
and
these people were scum. They are not people who should be celebrated.
Yeah, I think they also named one of the lines after an NHS hospital which specialised in AIDS treatment during the AIDS epidemic. And I saw various leftists crying about this. I mean, like anything that could be solved by not having sex should probably not be called an epidemic.
Not having sex with everything and everything.
Yeah.
In terms of bumholes, perhaps. Yes.
Yeah. I should specify gay sex. And the obviously the Windrush line. I mean, the thing is as well, it's kind of been funny because you've seen all these people come back out of the woodwork. The same people who you silenced before, it's like whack-a-mole, and then they all come back out again when the dust has settled or when another thing comes up like this. And they're saying, oh, these people came and built Britain, the Windrush generation. It's like, what did they build? Point to one building, name one housing estate. That funny enough,
Yeah.
There were housing estates in Faversham that were called Jerry built because they were built by German POWs.
Yeah.
But there's no like Jamaican built housing estate anywhere.
No, absolutely not. It's just nonsense. I mean, you know, it's like Britain by 46 or 47, when the Windrush arrived with these unwanted West Indians. Britain had been a nation for way over 1,000 years. Yeah, sure they built Britain. Sure they did.
Yeah.
It's just utter nonsense. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I can't remember. I saw that on Twitter somewhere as well, where someone was saying, yeah, really wanted this to be the end of the World War II as being the Britain founding thing, which was utter nonsense. So I totally agree with Jonathan Bowden. We've got to step over World War II. I'm always happy to honour the bravery of the ordinary fine dudes in World War II, but the politicians, nah. World War II was a huge body blow to Britain. You know, it was the final body blow in many respects. But I'll always honour the courage of the fighting men, but they were not fighting to make Europe diverse. They were not fighting to save various minorities of people. They were not. They were fighting for Britain. They were mostly nationalists, and by today's standards, 99% of them would be regarded as very right-wing. So, you know, because I've met a lot of them when I was a young man. There were loads of them around still, and they were not lefties. You know, they just weren't. But like, you know, the British public has been ignored by our so-called elites for, well, certainly since World War II, basically. We just have been. You can understand about 89% of what I'm saying, Tricky Boo. Which bits can't you understand? I'll try a bit better if I'm misunderstanding you a little bit there. I think we ought to just briefly touch on this Russian dude who died in jail recently, because I know I spoke to Mitch before the stream, and Mitch knows a little bit about him. Mitch, the Russian dude who died in jail that the Western media are going on and on about. The only thing I would say is I noticed that this dude's wife apparently has a boyfriend who she's had for a long time, even though this guy was in jail. So, but anyway, Mitch, what's your take on this?
Thing about Alexei Navalny was, on one hand, in the 2000s, he came across as very base. Like, he was calling like the Muslim Chechens and Central Asians so much cockroaches and wanted them all deported from Russia. But then around 2013, he started getting a lot of money from a lot of Western sources, probably CIA, if you were to trust the average Russian boomer's opinion. And all of a sudden, he started shilling over Western liberal stuff like LGBT and you have issues like where everyone perceives him there onward as being a complete Western shill, because you also notice that his daughter is studying in Stanford University. I think that's in California, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So Russians just looked upon him with a sense of suspicion, as like they just saw him as a complete Western shill, compared to what it was like in his early career, where he latched onto the nationalist sentiment, and then 2013 onward, he just started lapping up all the Western liberal crap, including in 2020 when he's supporting BLM.
That's interesting. I mean, look, I'm at the stage now, whenever anyone is praised by the Western mainstream media who's in Russia, I'm immediately sure he's an anti-Russian person. But look at it this way, guys. Everyone who is praised in Britain by the mainstream media, or in America by the mainstream media, and Australia, Canada, etc., is exactly the same. And most of Western Europe, they're all anti their own people. They are. If you want to be praised by the mainstream media, you basically got to be anti your own people. The one exception, of course, being Rishi Sunak, because Rishi Sunak's not British at all. He's an Indian banker. But, you know,
Yeah, so that's, I suppose that's the best expansion I got for like Navalny was just he's a complete Western shill who early on in his career, yeah, he came across as biased, like wanting to repatriate all the Central Asians and all that. But I said like at some point in like the early 2010s, as Putin's closing down all the NGOs and whatnot, Navalny's just gone full on Western shill, and he ends up getting locked up because of I can't remember something like embezzlement or something like that, because he's got this crypto account where he would never let anyone know what the money was going to. Like people would give him money, but he wouldn't tell them what he was doing with the money. So everyone looked at that and just thought, yeah, this is dodgy. Especially when you factor that the average Russian is very cynical. Because I mean, you had like the financial crises of the 90s in Russia, that bred a culture of strong suspicion of stuff like crypto. So that's another nail in Navalny's coffin, was he was just seen as corrupt in his own way.
Can I just say, look, I'm watching Ashton Duke here, who's saying North Sea Russia is no place for dissenting views. I mean, look, in Britain and also in Australia, let me tell you, you get anyone who comes, you can get months and years in jail for coming out against a mainstream so-called elite mainstream media view. You know, we have a bloke in Britain. What was it? 3-4 weeks ago, Alan? Who is
which one?
Yeah, which one? Because there are so many. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, Laura Taylor's husband, for example,
Yeah,
he's facing years in jail for going against the view of the mainstream media and our so-called elites. I don't see how we have any room in the West to accuse the Russians of anything. The idea that Russia is less free speech than we are is just fucking ludicrous these days.
yeah. North Sea. Sorry, Mitch, go on.
I was going to say, I've seen like quite a few Russians on social media who were just like, they're being very anti-Putin today over Navalny's death. But you don't see those people just getting arrested like for doing social media posts. It's like, I mean, Putin does it differently, where he'll just arrest anyone who could potentially become a ringleader, whereas our system will just punish everyone top down to a point where they'd punish someone like a 14-year-old girl because she called a police officer a lesbian or something. Whereas in Russia, it's only you get punished for dissent if you got the chance to become a ringleader or someone who can really challenge the system politically in terms of replacing the elite or whatever.
Well, that was a 14-year-old autistic girl who was hiding behind the stairs in Britain. That little 14-year-old girl who called that police officer a lesbian, and she obviously was, by the way. But she was hiding under the stairs and was dragged out by like 5 male police officers because we live in a free country.
Well, there was another story as well, wasn't there? There's been a few. Like there was one about a girl named Chelsea, I believe, quite a few years back now, who
was it the N word? Because I mean, her mate
on her
committed suicide
Instagram or something. Yeah. A friend got hit by a car, I believe, or they got killed in some fashion. And yeah, she posted his favorite song lyrics on Instagram or something, which happened to be a rap song. So on one hand, they're like filling the kids' heads with Black American exported culture, and then they're punishing them for actually partaking in it because it contains racial epithets. Like North Sea in the chat said, he pointed out, and Kissin, Konstantin Kissin, who a lot of people rightly don't like, but he does make this point, and it is a good point. He points out that like 10 times as many people in Britain, go to prison for or are punished for speech, versus Russia.
In Russia,
as you said,
100%, mate. Yep, 100%.
So we had Sven Longshanks a while ago as well. That he was a little bit late last year. He was literally prosecuted. He was literally sentenced to years in prison for having a podcast.
Yep. Aubrey in the chat, who I know is a good American girl, saying what charges are these people facing? And she's talking about people like Laura Taylor's husband. Well, I mean, Laura Taylor's husband was putting up disgusting racist stickers, like things like saying it's okay to be white. Yeah.
I don't actually know what the specific charges that were brought against Sam Mellier are, but usually it's under the 2003 Communications Act. That's what most of these people get prosecuted under.
But he wasn't putting out. He wasn't calling for direct violence about any particular group of people or anything like that. He was putting out stuff that was really milquetoast, like it's okay to be white, and stickers.
Yeah,
like
reject white guilt.
Yep.
There were a few others that I suppose they would say were the ones that tipped the scales, like what is it? Diversity equals replacement, or diversity equals,
which it does, but
something. Yeah, they're all true statements.
Yeah.
This is the thing, though. In that actual court case, they instructed the jury. I mean, why the jury even listened is obviously another conversation, but they instructed the jury to not. They said it wasn't to do with whether the statements on the stickers were true or not. It was about whether they were offensive, which of course, I mean, not to sound like some. Yeah.
Offensive to whom?
Not to sound like some 90s or early 2000s like classical liberal, but if you do actually have to start saying that it doesn't matter whether something's true, it's still offensive. You have to kind of look more closely at what it is that's actually being said. Yeah, it might have been diversity.
Diversity is anti-white because diversity just means anti-white. That's all it means, Victor.
Diversity becomes replacement. That's one of them.
Any of us with a working brain know that.
Yeah. We all know. He had another one that said 1948 SS Windrush docks 2066 become a minority in our homeland.
Yep.
The most precious possession you have in the world is your own people. 1966 win the World Cup, 2066 become a minority in our homeland, so on and so forth. That sort of stuff.
I mean, none of which are untrue, none of which are in the least offensive, and none of which are in any way should send you to prison. And he could get 5 years in jail for that.
Yeah.
And people will try and tell you Britain is a free country. I'm sorry, no, it's not. No, in that
Brexit
case, no, it's not.
Another deeply offensive sticker they made. Brexit was about immigration. True statement.
Which it was.
Defund the BBC. Heinous. Criminal. How could he say such a thing?
Well, there you go. Aubrey, I think he's now getting it. Racism only applies to white people. Yeah, that's 100%.
Of course, don't ask me how I know what these stickers said. I didn't have to look this up on the internet.
No.
But
I just agree with all of them, mate, basically. I mean, nothing he said is not true, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It's just not. And had it been even 25 years ago, that case would have been thrown out of court easily. And even less than 15 years ago, that case would have just been thrown out.
Yeah, so Doxastic Draco said the charge didn't revolve around the content of the sticker, and they argued that stickers was incitement, and adducing his Zazi paraphernalia as evidence of incitement. Yeah, they do that a lot now as well. There was that woman a while ago who she had a 3D printed firearm, so she was like obviously committing an actual offense, and she was clearly someone that was had various issues. But that, one of the big things was that she had a couple of titles, but she had the Anarchist Cookbook, and that was one of the big things that they caught her on. And they said that it contains instructions to build weaponry, which it does not. I think everyone in my IT class at school downloaded that PDF at some point or another. I know what's in it, and it doesn't contain anything like that. Although I never had a copy, obviously.
No, of course not. But yeah, I mean, Wolfish Nationalist in the chat saying there's a chap in Australia who faces prison for doing a Roman type salute. But you know what? In order to stop a bus in Australia, one has to do a Roman type salute. And I think there's a test case to come in Victoria, for example, where I live, where if you stop a bus with your Roman type salute, you might get taken to prison. You might. You know? It's that stupid. It really is.
Yeah, but of course,
And,
they're at
you know,
the point now where
I'm not even joking. It is that stupid.
Yeah, but there are a lot of figures. I mean, you see these people all the time where they will push something that's obviously obscene, but in you know, in terms of charges or social stigma or something like that, and then whilst digging under the surface, they'll find something that is unrelated, but is kind of what they were ultimately looking for, and they use that as a kind of as a means by which they justify this. There's been a few cases like, you know, cancel culture type things where they've sort of dug into someone over something they said, and they found something else they said completely unrelated, and gone after and changed tact and gone after them based on that.
I don't know. I just think we're in a position these days that the idea that people in Britain and America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, etc., the idea that we can somehow claim that we live in free countries relative to, say, Russia is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. You know, you basically there's a lot more freedom of speech in Russia, as far as I can work out, than there is in most Western nations. You know, there really is. There's just more.
Well, the thing is as well that, like, the Russian one, this is something that, I mean, he's kind of a bit unpopular in places, but this is something that Joel Davis said on a debate on, I forget the name of the channel. It was the one Giant Geo used to go on. Yeah, he pointed this out a while ago. He was saying, like, at least in the Soviet Union, right, or like now in modern Russia, you know who and what it is you shouldn't be criticizing and why. Whereas, you know, in the West, it's not only does it change all the time, but it's like it's all stuff that is dysgenic in principle. You know, it's you know, you can't speak in what you perceive as the interests of your children if it comes to them wanting to change their gender. You know, you can't you know, you can't speak out about the demographic changes of your community, even though the people that will literally report you to the police will say the same thing in different words about another community in another place. You know, it's just the most obscene doublespeak, and it's not healthy either. It's just not. You know, you kind of look around and you perceive that there's just more and more nutcases out there, more and more people that have just completely gone off the rails, and you think, well, they're not living in a healthy society, not in a sense of trust, not in a sense of a transparency of hierarchy or power. You know, it's not. We're not living in a breeding ground for stable, productive people. Mitch, you got anything to add?
No, I can't say I've got much to add in the grand scheme of things. Like, I mean, with Russia, yeah, it's mainly everyone knows. You know, if you're someone like Navalny, where you've got some popularity, even just like 5% of the vote, and you're slagging off Putin directly, yeah, you are going to lose your position. You're probably going to get screwed over in the courts and whatnot.
Yeah.
But if you're some random guy in, I don't know, in the middle of Moscow, saying a few naughty things on an Instagram story, oh, you're not really going to get much trouble for that because you're too small. You're not much of a threat, and it's just too much hassle for the police, just to book you for slagging off Putin on one Instagram story while you were drunk on a Saturday night or whatever. So why would we do it?
I just feel that it's ever increasingly obvious that the only group which is not allowed to have any sort of self-identity is white people.
Yeah.
And obviously, especially in Britain, but also to a large extent in Australia and Canada, etc., and what have you, that's Anglo-Celtic white people. But I mean, there's loads of other white people. But it's only white people who are not allowed to have any sort of self-identity or any sort of pride in their identity. We are obviously being made into the bad guys. And that is especially true of straight white men, of course.
And people always try to tie this down to like one reason, but it is multifaceted. It's lots of different reasons. You know, there's one extent to which it's driven by power, in which they don't want a sort of they don't want a broad populace that could sort of form a countervailing elite group at any instance. So they want to kind of keep those people down and sort of very much under control. And then there's also like a group to which it's ethnic resentment, and then there's another group to which it's like self-hating, almost oikophobia. You know, it's and it's just this perfect storm of sort of really horrific conditions that we're all having to sort of live under, that make up the current state of things.
We've all seen, particularly since late last year, I mean, we've all seen the how can we put this where YouTube won't get too annoyed, the diversity which has been employed into our countries, particularly Britain, Australia, etc., which is now going off alarming because of what's going on in Gaza, etc. And you now get one group of people which were always vastly in favor of like destroying our nations as ethno states. You know, in Britain's case, Anglo-Celtic, obviously. They were always in favor of that, and they have suddenly realized that importing all these millions upon millions upon millions of third world people is even biting them in the arse now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's something funny that I've seen actually quite recently, is you see on Twitter, I'm seeing a lot of like you know, even like BBC presenters or random, you know, former politicians or councillors and stuff like that now saying like, oh, you know, there was a particularly funny one a few weeks ago where someone said, oh, some fascist adjacent Twitter account brought up about blacks, you know, talking on the phone very loudly on buses, and now that's all I see everywhere. But there's been other instances. I saw one recently where like people were talking about how, you know, sort of US style decline had arrived here in Britain, even though they didn't see it that way. And they were saying like, oh, you know, why is all the Nescafe Gold locked up in my local shop? You know, and some of those accounts, when they post this, they then later do another tweet where they go, oh, I was pilloried by racists and this, that, and the other. And so they end up in this weird quandary where they're starting to see the issue, but they also can't talk about the issue publicly because we will then bring up what the issue is.
Yep, exactly. You know, the thing is that the best chance of these ethnic stroke religious minorities to like not have problems was actually to keep the societies that they wanted to destroy. You know, that's the ironic thing about it. You know, it's if they destroy those societies, they're going to find themselves in a far worse position. You know.
Yeah.
I know how they couldn't see that, because they're supposed to have this high intelligence, we're told quite often. So I don't know really, but it's,
well, this
you know,
is the
if
thing
you're going
where
to fill your country with third world people with medieval ideas, well, you know, that's going to happen, you know.
Well, this is where like you can see the resentment side of like the reasons why it is the way it is currently is sort of getting bigger with time. It's because that's the one that still can keep pushing, can keep the momentum on the way things have been going, and that they can keep it moving in that direction is because they're the ones that will actually literally just ride the bomb, you know, to the ground. You know, they don't give a damn if it seems kind of suicidal. They're just driven by sort of malicious thoughts. And
because they're also not this particular small. They're not all this particular small ethno-religious group, because there are loads of our own people who are absolute traitors, basically.
Yeah, of course all the people they've brought in as well. You know, like we've seen this thing with Fannie Mae with the whole. Is that what her name is? Fannie Mae. Let me have a quick double check. The woman who's presiding over the Trump case. Pretty sure that isn't her name, but let's have a look.
Fannie Willis, someone's saying in the chat. I don't know if that's
Fannie
true.
Willis, is that it?
I have no idea, mate. I don't know. Good Huawei.
Yeah. Fannie Willis, that's the one. You know, like there's a guy that actually wrote a book on this. I never read it. It's a small online figure, so I don't even know if it's a real book or just a PDF you can buy. But covering like just the enormous amounts of these like low IQ, sort of dumb judges that Biden put into various positions and have been put in by previous presidents, you know, over a great period of time. You know, and it's like, you know, those people are put in that they're selected for specifically because they are both useless and full of resentment. And we have a whole class of people like this here in Britain as well. And
sadly,
yeah, and you know that they form up a large part of it as well. Literally, our replacement is also driving this. Our replacements, I should say. But yeah, it's
I mean,
pretty
I
dark
don't
position
know what
around.
you think, mate. I still think there's a lot of pretty base Brits of all classes. Yeah, I still think there are some based upper class Brits. There are some based middle class Brits. There are still quite a lot of based working class Brits. But I think they are isolated. They find it very difficult to link up with each other, and they are subject to constant 24/7 propaganda about how bad we are, which is, you know, obviously nonsense. But that's what happens. But
they're ultimately just not as tough as they need to be.
Do you think there are still quite a lot of base people?
Yeah,
they're not as tough as they need to be. Yeah, we're not the Elizabethans, sadly.
Yeah.
Anymore. You know, we're not Drake's guys. We're not even Wellington's guys, and we're not even the World War II guys in some respects. You know, which is true. But you know, that's what 70 years of propaganda will do to you, and education, which is more propaganda and brainwashing than it is education. But I still think there are a lot of pretty good based Brits of all classes.
There's enough
military theorist says we're not even Churchill's guys. Well, I hope that's a joke, mate, because I'm no fan of Churchill. You've got to watch some more of my content, mate. But it's and Churchill was half American anyway, and very beholden to certain how shall we describe them, ethno-political interests anyway, but with a lot of money, because Churchill always wanted to live beyond his means. But anyway, I do think there are still a lot of base Brits, just like I think there's a lot of base Australians, but I just think we're so isolated these days, and just subjected to 24/7 anti-white propaganda. Basically, I can't put it any more succinctly than that, really.
Yeah.
Mitch, what's your feelings on this, mate?
I mean, in terms of upper class Brits being like having some section, I mean, I'd have to ask you, where are they? Because
I don't think there are many, mate. I don't think there are many, and I think they're very scared, because those guys are even more liable to get picked off than we are. You know.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
I don't think there are. I don't think there are many. Don't get me wrong. But there are.
Well, the thing is this, right? I mean, there are plenty of Brits who, for example, they'll talk about how, we don't like immigration, but then when someone like PA comes, or guys like us who are a lot more explicitly racial in our view about it, they disavow us because we're just too much beyond the pale. So I'm not so hopeful.
I don't know. Look, me, I'm just going to carry on. I'm going to carry on celebrating the British Empire, and we were talking last week about stuff in India and what have you. And the Brits went and stopped sati, which was Hindu widow burning, and things like the thugs who used to kill people who were travelling on Indian roads. And fuck them, Britain did good stuff. The Indians
it's like
were bloody lucky to have the Brits. They don't know anything else.
Well, it's like the thing is, like there was that guy, I can't remember his name, but like he was like this black academic or something like that on Twitter who's going, "Oh well, if you know the difference between these different types of Africans, chances are you're a racist." And they go, and because the whole point was, oh yeah, the quote-unquote racists are often the ones who are intellectually and anthropologically curious enough to know about all these different cultures. So, for example, you'll get the average shitlip who can't tell the difference between a Khoisan, a Yoruba, and a Bantu, whereas the likes of us could. And I just found
I
that
certainly
interesting.
can, and I am certainly a racist. But yeah, someone calls me a racist, I laugh, and I just say, yeah, of course I am.
Well, but that's the thing, though, isn't it? I mean, you take the average Victorian traveller, and I can't remember his name, Frederick something, who went all over Central Asia. You can totally imagine guys like him would have been very racist, quote unquote racist.
Frederick Burnham, the guy who travelled around Russia. Are you talking about, Mitch?
Yeah,
he was a Royal Horse Guards dude, I believe, and one of the tallest men in the British Army. He was about 6'6", and he got killed in the Sudan fighting the dervishes.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called something like Bukhara to Khyber or something like that. But he travelled all over Russian Central Asia in the 1870s. And then he volunteered for the war to go and relieve Gordon in Khartoum. And he was killed in one of the battles there, charging outside of the British Square and fighting with his sword. He was a great guy.
Yeah, that's like the whole point. Like the overarching point I'm trying to get is, it's funny how the quote-unquote the racists, the bigots, are often the ones who they know the most about anthropology and different cultures and all this. Whereas the standard shitlib, who likes to imagine himself as one who loves human diversity and multiculturalism and all this, often the most ignorant regarding different cultures. I always find that concept very interesting, though. It's like, I think Survivor Drive also said something very similar, in the sense that the right winger who doesn't want his country to become a nesting ground for all and sundry, from Alaska to Timbuktu, will know a lot more about all these different anthropological curiosities than the average shitlip who imagines himself to be a worldly internationalist or whatever.
There was a really funny tweet I saw. It was about that Azidi character, the acid attacker, that we talked about a few streams ago.
Yeah.
And they were saying like, oh, in my group chat, people are saying like, oh, maybe he's from this vague ethnic group or this valley region. Meanwhile, the British police, with all their sensitivity training and all these hours and hours of various things they've had to sit through, are just like, we think he's brown. It is kind of funny how that works. I think there was Bovril on Twitter made a joke a while back about Mir Puris, and it's like most people wouldn't get that. That is kind of a bit of an in-joke, because most people don't even understand what the point there is, or what the connection is that they make up. A majority, like a vast majority of all the Pakistanis in Britain are Mir Puris rather than just purely Pakistanis generally.
Yep. No, absolutely correct. I can't argue with that. I'm going to use this as a bit of a segue, because we're talking about British colonialism and all the rest of it. I am happy to announce that the excellent Morgoth has invited me to join the stream that he does with Endeavour, which is reviewing classic films. And I think it's going to be tomorrow on Endeavour's channel on YouTube. And it's going to be Zulu, which is my favourite film from 1965, which is, of course, about the Battle of Rorke's Drift during the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. and I was very, very happy to be invited by Morgoth to join a review of this film. And I'm really looking forward to doing that. I've enjoyed many of their reviews of films, not least 55 Days in Peking, which is a great film. Yes, Victor Claros, I have watched Gordon and Khartoum, and that's one of the films I'm going to suggest that they do, because I know they like Charlton Heston.
That's a good film.
That I like too. Yeah, it is. It's an excellent movie. Also, they've done, what was it? It was The Bounty versus HMS Defiant. That was another really good one about the Nelson's Navy era. That's another good film that Morgoth and Endeavour have reviewed on them.
Did they do a review on Get Carter? Because I'm sure I saw a video of them reviewing it, but I didn't. I went back to try and find it, and I couldn't find it.
I haven't seen that one. I haven't seen it. I like you talking about the original Michael Caine one.
Yeah.
Because there's been two. The original Michael Caine version was a good British gangster movie from the 60s, early 70s. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I saw them do a review of it, but I couldn't find it when I went back for it. So maybe I saw something else. Maybe it was another one they did.
Yeah, I didn't notice that one, I got to say. But yeah, it is a film that I like. But I just noticed they've reviewed quite a lot of movies that I liked. Like they've done Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, for example, and stuff like that. I'd like them to do Master and Commander. I think that's one that would be great for Endeavour and Morgoth to look at.
Yeah.
Ashton Duke is saying Get Car was mostly shot in his area. I remember Get Car is Michael Caine plays this dude who's supposed to originally come from the north, but he's lived in London for ages, and he's this kind of gangster type dude. And his brother gets killed, so he goes back to get revenge. It's a pretty good movie. I liked it. Have I watched Gordon of Khartoum? Says Victor Caleros. If you're talking about Khartoum with Charlton Heston, yes. If you're talking about Gordon of Khartoum, the documentary, I've watched that too. Yeah. I've also read about, I don't know, probably 15 books about the Sudan wars. Probably a bit more than that, actually. Probably more like 20. But yeah.
Am I misremembering? Does the Gordon of Khartoum film feature the same guy that plays Colour Sergeant Bourne in Zulu?
Yes. He plays somebody else though.
He plays another commander, doesn't he? Like another.
Yeah, doesn't he play Wolseley?
General.
Isn't he Wolseley in that film?
Let's have a look.
I think he plays Wolseley in that film. Was it Nigel Green? I'm trying to remember now.
Yeah, Nigel Green.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely in that film, looking at his face, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he might play Wolseley in that.
Oh, movie. Yeah, General Wolseley,
Commander-in-Chief.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, he was the guy who, if you know the light opera stuff, you know I am the very model of a modern major general. That's based on Wolseley, because Wolseley was this educated scientific soldier. And he once said,
definitely don't get any of those types anymore.
Yeah, no, you don't. But Wolseley once turned around and said he was not fit to black the boots of General Gordon, because General Gordon was a true Christian hero, of course, and he was. And Wolseley, who was like one of the most famous British 19th century generals, in fact, the only other one as famous as him was probably Lord Roberts. Wolseley said he wasn't fit to black. He wasn't fit to black General Gordon's boots, because General Gordon was this real Christian hero who really was not scared of anything. You know, really very amazing man. I'm a big admirer, actually. But yeah. But yeah, Khartoum is a great movie. I hope that hopefully Morgoth and Endeavour will do that, and I also really hope they do Master and Commander, because that would fit very well with those two dudes, I think. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to doing that, which I think is tomorrow. Should be on Endeavour's channel. So yeah, segue into that one.
Yeah. On that note, though, I will have
to.
That note, though, I will have to head off, because it is my my hard limit I usually set for getting off, if I need to get up quite early.
Yeah, not a problem. Always very, very happy to have you on here, Ram. And you're one of the founders of this stream and our Discord and all the rest of it. So always most welcome.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna finish this shortly anyway.
All right.
So yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
I'll
Mitch,
talk to you both later.
Go on, mate. Go on. Mitch, any final thoughts before we end this?
I mean, I can't really think of much to say. I mean, I was watching Master and Commander the other day, so it's a wonder Morgoth hasn't already done a reaction to it. I would have thought he'd done one. I haven't really kept up to date with. Yeah, it's like it's a bit. I mean, it came at the wrong time. In hindsight, because it came out.
Yeah, because it came out when all the Lord of the Rings stuff was coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you had Pirates of the Caribbean, which kind of overshadowed that. So instead of having a film series based on Master and Commander books, instead we got Pirates of the Caribbean, which that kind of mock.
I started reading the Master and Commander books. I don't know. I think the first one, Master and Commander, was written in 68 or 69. I probably read that in 78 or 79. So, I've been a huge fan of the Patrick O'Brian novels that movie is based on for many, many years, and it's 20 novels. It's often been described as it's one huge book, really. You can read those 20 novels, and it's like one huge, thousands of pages long book about the Navy, the Royal Navy in Nelson's era. And they're superb. They're just superb. I mean, the books are even better than the movie, I've got to say. But the film is definitely, I'd say it's probably my second favorite film after Zulu. And there are things I don't like about Zulu, by the way, because which probably I will get to talk about tomorrow on this review, because there are 60s bits in that film which are completely wrong. But yeah, it's the Patrick O'Brian, Aubrey Maturin 20 novel canon is a great series of books. I would recommend to any traditional man. Action Duke, when is the stream? I don't know. All I know is it's supposed to be tomorrow, and it's going to be on Endeavour's YouTube channel. I can't tell you anything else. If I knew, I'd tell you more.
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't really got much to go off. The only plan I've got at the moment is just after this stream, I'm going to listen to that audio book of The White Company by Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah, and there's another one, by the way. The White Company's great. It's for anyone who doesn't know it. It's Arthur Conan Doyle, who obviously wrote the Sherlock Holmes books. But it's about an English company of archers and men at arms in the the 100 Years' War era. And there's a one before it, which is called Sir Nigel, which is a prequel, which is about the guy who's in charge of the White Company. So there's two books. And it's excellent. And it's just the sort of stuff that young Anglo-Celtic people should be reading, in my opinion.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm pretty sure it's based on John Hawkwood, isn't it? Who was like a mercenary most times.
John Hawkwood and the White Company. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it's set during the 100 Years' War, and the English are fighting everybody, as we often were, and winning most of the time.
Well, it's like
And
I mean, well, it's like you got at that time, though, like I mean, it's like at that time you had two main powers which were having like their troops be seen as a models, us and the French. You know, you have the Portuguese at the Battle of Aljubarrota, where the Portuguese had like 700 of our lads, mainly these longbowmen, helping them ward off the Spanish, because it was like 7,000 Portuguese plus English against like 31,000 Castilians and French at that battle, and predictably we won alongside the Portuguese, because of course the French because they just thought, because the French cavalry thought it was a good idea to go charging up a slope against longbowmen in that particular battle.
They're good books, Mitch. They are good books, and they're the sort of stuff I used to read when I was like, I don't know, 15, 16, that sort of age. It's sort of bit of, and obviously the sort of stuff that no one reads these days, because you mustn't be nasty colonialist Brits, you know. But yeah,
well, I remember like what 10 years ago, the books we were showed. Like there was one book I was pretty much obligated to read this one book called The Carbon Diaries 2040, and the whole thing about it is, Britain is having to do carbon rationing because of climate change or whatever. And it's just like a dystopian future where it's just like, oh, you have this young girl who I actually forget it, because I mean it's not a well-known book at all. Like I tried to look it up like a year ago, and it's like there's barely anything mentioned about the book online.
Yeah,
So
I get what you're saying, mate. I do. There was somebody who I retweeted on Twitter yesterday, I think, and it was Jonathan Bowden quotes. And the tweet that I retweeted says, "Britishness is about glory and power and heroic vitality in being male or female, not some combination of the two. It is about proud of being white, because you have to be white to be British." And as I replied, yeah, you got to be Anglo-Celtic to be real British, and that means, yep, you're white. And that's my opinion on that stuff, to be honest.
Well, it's like I mean the only thing I don't want to go. I mean, I inadvertently started a little debate over whether, because I mean, because you get the term like Anglo-Saxon, which I'd say that's more of an English thing, whereas Anglo-Celtic would be the more British way of saying it. So, I inadvertently like started this argument over.
Exactly.
Oh, do we call ourselves Anglo-Celtic or Anglo-Saxon?
If you're British, you're Anglo. I'd say Anglo-Celtic if you're British, because there are people in Wales and Scotland, to some degree in Northern Ireland, and even in Cornwall, who are Celtic, and I'm definitely Anglo-Celtic. I have Celtic bits in me. So and that's fine. We're Anglo-Celtic people, and I think that's my and has been for a long time the way I describe real British people. We're Anglo-Celtic.
Well, I'll just point down
the majority of us, particularly in England, are Anglos. But,
well, it's like, I mean, I'd say if you identify primarily as an Englishman, you call yourself an Anglo-Saxon. But it's like, I don't know, because the thing is, I mean, we're kind of the oddballs in these islands because we're the only non-Celtic population. Like, we're Germanic, but everyone around us are Celts, like Cornish, Welsh, Irish, Scots.
But we're also the majority.
It's similar to, I don't know, it's like how, I don't know, like you'll get, it's like how Finland speaks a weird language that's not related to anyone around them other than Estonia. It's similar to that in the sense that we're the only Germanic people in all of Great Britain, but everyone around us are all Celts. So it's like we have that sort of weird. It's like a weirdness that makes us quirky in a similar way. It's like, because I mean, if the English never invaded this land, like if we never invaded this land and said we stayed in northern Germany, England would be called, like, I don't know what it would be called today. It'd still be called Britain. It would just be Welsh-speaking people dominating the land rather than English people like us today. So it's one of the things where,
well, my father's family are English. overwhelmingly English with a little bit of Scottish, and I think like one Spanish great grandmother. And my mother's family were half Irish and half Welsh. So I'm Anglo-Celtic. I got no problem with that. Part of the reason I thought I'm going to do this stream, even though I had a triple heart bypass a week ago, mate, was because I'm an Englishman and I'm a Brit, and we're fucking tough, and we just do what we got to do because British. You know,
well, it's like
my dad and my grandfather, my great grandfather, my great grandfather, they would all look at me and say, "Fuck it, mate, triple heart bypass. You got to do what you got to do because you're still an Englishman and a Brit." And that's my view on it. I'm very proud to be British. Wouldn't be any other nation. Wouldn't even dream of being any other nation.
Well, I mean, I'm guilty at times of being self-loathing.
As I'm concerned.
Well, that's one thing about me is I'm guilty of this where I'll just do some self-loathing where, for example, I don't know, because it's like I don't know, it's like you get some people who say, "Oh, well," I mean, perhaps it's just me being really autistic about it, but it's like I don't know. I'd say as English we call ourselves Anglo-Saxon, but when we're British we call ourselves Anglo-Celtic, in that same sense. But then you get some people who use the whole Celtic side of us to undercut again. Like, because you get some people who say,
100%.
"Oh, well, the English have nothing in common with the other Germanics. Like, they've got nothing in common with the Scandinavians or whatever. Therefore, the English should only identify with the Celts." And I go, not really. I think like English are like it's like 1 foot in Britain and 1 foot in Northern Europe in terms of the continent. I'd say. I mean, the Irish Welsh, the Bretons are kind of the same.
Mitch, you and I are both. Mitch, you and I both have good friends on Discord, for example, who are Scotsmen. Good friends. You know?
Well,
who we 100% get on with. No problem whatsoever.
Well, this is my overarching point, is the fact that like with us, right, because we're Germanic, we've got 1 foot inside Great Britain because, of course, you know, genetically, we're more in touch with our neighbours of the Celts. But at the same time, we speak a Germanic language, and thus, as far as the language goes, we've got more similarities with Germans and Dutch. But it's like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'd say, like, on one hand, there's quite a lot of similarities we share with lots of the Swedish, for example, like heavy cultural politeness and all this. But then there's also we have a heavy sense of humour, like what the Irish have. So it's like one of those things where it's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, sort of weirdness. Yep. I don't know how to explain this. It's just
again, Mitch. I would say on our Discord. I would say, Mitch, on our Discord, we have people from Northern Ireland, including, you know, obviously loyalists, but also we have people who are loyalists from Southern Ireland, who again are our friends, who certainly I get on with extremely well and very much admire as men. So again, like I say, I'm an Englishman, absolutely. If anyone asks me, what are you? I'm an Englishman, but I'm a Brit as well. And I can absolutely admire Celtic Brits as well as Anglo Brits. And it was the combination of those peoples which created the greatest empire the world has ever seen.
Well, yeah, because I mean, I remember all this anthropological thing where it's like the Russians are talking about how, oh well, if you weren't, because I mean the Germans are mixed of like Celts, Germanics, and Slavs, where you have the Celts who are more industrial. Because I mean, look up the Celts, what they used to do before the Romans invaded. Very industrial, very sort of a more people of craftsmanship. Then you got the Germanics who are more sort of. I mean, nowadays, the Germanics aren't the same as what they were 2,000 years ago, but like you take the Germans and the English, they're more like bureaucratic sort of people with a capacity for bravery in combat. But then you got the Slav side of the Germans, which is a lot more schizophrenic. So it's reckoned that the Germans won't be so fierce with a mix of Celts, Germanic, and Slavic. in a similar way that the British won't be so great were it not for mixing of Germanic and Celtic, because on one hand, the Industrial Revolution was always going to happen in Britain because
totally agree,
the
mate.
Celtic. Yeah, so you look at the Celts, what they did over here, very industrial, very hardworking, that sort of thing. When you get the Germanics with their warrior spirit, that kind of blended into the Anglo-Saxons and later on into the Middle Ages.
And also, Mitch, the only, almost the only people in the entire world to defeat the Vikings, the Scandinavians, almost the only people to actually defeat them were the Anglo-Saxons, with Alfred the Great and his descendants. And there are people.
Yeah, it's like, I mean,
they were the only people who were tough enough and well trained enough warriors to actually defeat these guys. When you talk about the last kingdom, when it was just Wessex, when England was almost conquered, but it wasn't conquered, and the Englishmen fought back and gradually took the place back. And Alfred's grandson, I think it was the first king of a united England.
Yeah, because I don't know. I certainly would say something like, I don't know, in a sense, like you have the English who are a lot more sort of bureaucratic, a lot more administrative sort of people. You have the Welsh who are a lot more in like they prefer song and poetry. The Scottish who are like the mad lads, in the sense that I mean, it's in the sense that they very warlike people in that sense. Where because I mean, you look at literally every war throughout history in Europe for the past 1,000 years, chances of there's a Scotsman involved. Like you'll find these aristocratic families in like Germany and Sweden by descending from like Scottish mercenaries or whatever.
Loads of Irish mercenaries all over the place as well. You look at the wild geese and all the rest of it. Like I say, I think it is this unique combination of Anglo-Celtic people, which is the English and the Scottish and the Welsh and the Northern Irish, and even to some degree the Irish generally. It was this unique combination of people which made the British Empire into the greatest and largest empire the world has ever seen it or ever will see, because it will never get replaced. So, it was this unique combination, all of whom had really good things about them. And all of whom, working together, were able to just defeat everybody.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I know it's like, because one thing you notice that, so even while we're like, even while we have the same origins as, say, like the likes of the Vikings and whatnot, like, you notice also there's a lot of, like, unlike other forms of Germanic folklore, you notice that our manual folklore is very different from, let's say, German or Scandinavian, because so in our folklore, elves are seen as like pure magical beings, or seen as pearls of wisdom and all this. Whereas in Scandinavia, that's not the case. Like elves are seen as like little tricksters who hide out in the woods. So it's like Tolkien's version of the elves is very different from, let's say, the Scandinavian version of the elves, even though they come from the same root in terms of original Germanic people, from whom the Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Germans, etc. descend from. So it's one of those things where that Celtic influence into our English folklore.
I'm very much. I am very much, Mitch, in favour of what you're talking about with Tolkien, etc. There's this magic, and I think it is a kind of magic. It's a myth and magic mixture that Tolkien was trying to get at in his books and so on, which is this mixture between the Anglo-Saxons and the Celts, and also to some degree the Scandinavians and the Germans and what have you. There is this just magic about these West Europeans.
It's like Tacitus. It's like you'll get I don't know, they get these Roman descriptions of, like, let's say, the Celts and the Germanics, like Tacitus, for example, often talks about how, oh well, our ancestors in northern Germany were very sort of more faithful, noble, all the rest of it. And then you get the Romans talk about the Celts. I mean, it's like the Romans take a lot of their armor, like the chainmail and whatnot, from the Celts, because at the end of the day, the Celts are very industrial, very hardworking. People with great craftsmanship.
They did. They copied loads of stuff. The Romans were quite proud of their copying of stuff. Yes.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, I mean,
100%.
I mean, people. Yeah, that's one thing. People. I mean, that's one. Because I mean, I once like talked to a guy like bloody years ago. You talking like this was like back when I was like 15 or whatever. And this guy, pretty much, he's of the opinion. He used to believe that the Roman Empire just invented everything it ever used, like everything. But it's like no, it was a matter of the Romans. They learned off others. Like, it wasn't just a matter of the Romans were Übermensch. Yeah, it's like similar to. It's like similar to us, like you know.
No, they copied stuff, and they were quite open about copying stuff too.
Well, I mean, it's like
if the Romans saw a good idea, they copied it, and good on them. You know.
Well, yeah, it's like the British Empire. I mean, you factor that. I mean, you take. Oh no. I'm trying to think now when I'm trying to go with this, but like, I don't know. I mean, you talk about redcoats. They take their inspiration from, let's say, the English armies of 100 Years' War, small, nimble, professional armies whose main strength is equality rather than quantity, like the French love to indulge in. So there's like that element. So it's like stuff like that where I don't know where I'm going with this. Like, but I'm just trying to go on about strengths of the British Empire that other empires didn't have. All this.
I just think we had this unique. We had this unique mixing of really great Western Northern European peoples, and I think we should be proud of them, and we should be teaching our children to be proud of them. And we didn't ever in Britain do anything to be ashamed of. Our sailors and our soldiers. And our industrialists, our inventors, our workers, they were just the best in the world, always. And that's my honest opinion, which maybe that's what I would be still teaching people if I had my way.
Well, it's like, I mean,
certainly never ever did anything to be ashamed of, ever.
It's like, I don't know. I mean, I can have my gripes about the English language at times. It's like, I don't know, like, I mean, once I'm done with the current book,
you're into your lingo stuff, mate. I know that. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but it's like, I know, I got like 5 books about Shakespearean plays, like Henry V, Merchant of Venice, all that. I need to read them just to.
Love Henry.
Well, it's like. I know I'm reading more because I just want, because I mean, some people, I mean, there's plenty of people who will say Elizabethan English was like the most beautiful form of English. I would be hard pressed to say no. I mean, I still show Old English, but I just think Old English is too distant for people to learn. I don't think. On one hand, I'd like it if we went back to Old English just because the language would be made so much harder for people to learn that it would just stop foreigners coming over as much. Because that's one reason why. I think that's one reason why mass immigration is so pertinent over is because our language is quite easy to learn compared to, let's say, a language like, I don't know, Hungarian, where no one goes over there because the language is pretty hard to learn. Never mind the fact that it's not as wealthy as us. So I don't know. I'm just going really autistic about the language.
I can barely speak French, but my French is incredibly bad. But I'm no great fan of it.
You can't be any worse than mine.
I'm an Englishman. I can't be.
I mean, I don't know. I don't understand how.
French, I'm sorry.
I don't understand how someone can learn
that
French.
much I will say.
I don't understand how. I don't understand how someone can learn French, to be honest, because I tried learning it when I was in like year 6. I hated it so much, I just gave up. So you gotta have a patience with saying to deal with that bloody language. It's like, I don't know. I mean, if you're going to learn a language like that, learn Spanish. I'd say or Portuguese, but mind you, European Portuguese, not Brazilian, because Brazilian.
I wanted to learn Spanish. They wouldn't let me do it at school. They said, "No, you got to learn French." So I just didn't bother because I wasn't interested in learning French. But anyway, yeah. All right, guys. We've gone 2.5 hours, which is a bit longer than I intended to go this evening, to be honest. Please look out on Endeavour's channel tomorrow on YouTube, where hopefully I'll be joining Endeavour and Modern Film Zulu, although there are things about Zulu which are not accurate, which hopefully we will talk about. And we'll be back next week. I'm sorry there's no music on this stream, boys, but like I've decided until I get this computer replaced, I just can't play music on here. Instead, what I will do is say, please go and check out Chris Gard's excellent YouTube channel, where you will find the theme tune for this channel, which is The White Man's Burden. And also, please go and check out Patriotic Archive on YouTube. And Patriotic Archive actually came out with the thumbnail for this channel, which is some British Royal Marine Light Infantry guys who defended the British legation during the Siege of Peking in 1900 against the Chinese Boxers and the Chinese army. Successfully defended.
I haven't watched up. I haven't watched up.
Thank you very much to my guests, Mitch, and also to. It's a good movie, actually, 55 Days in Peking, and Morgoth and Endeavour do review it. So, yeah, go check them out. So, yeah, please go and check out that tomorrow. We'll be back next week. Do like and subscribe to the channel. And hang on, let me just make sure we didn't get any super chats on entropy. I don't think we did, but I'll go check. So yeah, guys, I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully on Endeavour's channel. And other than that, we'll see you next week. And thank you very much to Mitch and to Armin for joining me this evening. Go off and never let the bastards grind you down. We ain't lost yet.